Yeah, then welcome everyone to this panel. My name is Daniel Schumann, and together with Kathrin Zippel, we are convening today's panel on anti-diversity, anti-gender, and the democratic university, epistemic struggles and infrastructures. And as you have noticed, we are all online, and you are over there in Oxford, and we hope that the connection doesn't break down. But we would like to thank already Teja Stongare for helping us establishing this connection and helping us with the technicalities, and also to María here in Berlin for helping us online with this panel and for assisting with monitoring the chat and so on. So thank you so much. And we have conceptualized this session today as an online roundtable, and we are delighted to welcome this round of contributors to this roundtable. We are really excited about that. And the idea of this roundtable is to examine different infrastructures of higher education and their relationship to anti-gender and anti-diversity dynamics across different regional contexts, including the US, Turkey, and the European Union. And this roundtable, I need to say, builds on a workshop we had in Berlin in November last year, where a couple of the presenters today already met, but we also have new presenters here. And this workshop was on contested spaces of democracy and inclusion in European universities. And that's a workshop we are building on here today. And our starting point are current attacks on universities, which we understand as part of broader processes of de-democratization, in which academic freedom, critical knowledge production, and diversity agendas become key sites of contestation and restructuring. And accordingly, this roundtable examines how these dynamics play out through epistemic struggles and the reconfigurations of the infrastructure that underpin knowledge production and academic life. And in what follows, you will hear different short inputs. So we really tried to make these inputs short, so we have a lot of time afterwards for debate, discussion, exchange, Q&A. So you will hear different approaches about different aspects of higher education and anti-diversity, anti-democracy, and anti-gender. And we have reserved the second half of the session for discussion. And we kindly ask you to hold your questions until the presentations have concluded. And you can also, of course, especially if you're here online, post any questions you might have in the chat. So we will answer them afterwards. So, and now without further ado, I'll hand over to the co-convener of the session and to the first panelist, Kathrin Zippel, Einstein Professor of Sociology and Gender Studies at Freie Universität Berlin.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for organizing this event, and thank you for all the panelists to join us here. And it's wonderful to see an audience as well online. From my perspective, I'm in Berlin currently. Now, good afternoon. I speak on behalf of my co-authors, Jessica Gold and Laura Nelson, who can't be here today. And I argue that what we see in the United States currently, since the second presidency of Donald Trump, is not a gradual erosion, but it's epistemic warfare. And what I mean with epistemic warfare is the deliberate use of state administrative power in form of funding cuts, data removal, personnel dismissal, program closures, that all are dismantling the institutional conditions of feminist-informed knowledge production. And what we see is that three enabling conditions made this rapid assault possible. First, feminist institutionalization. So decades of embedding gender research in federal funding structures have paradoxically produced a visible, governable infrastructure with easily identifiable programs to be cut. And second, in terms of the political setting, there's been this alignment of three branches. We see the Republican-run Congress, the conservative Supreme Court, and executive overreach. Just as an example, an executive order was passed that peer review is now reduced to advisory within science funding agencies, and political appointments are empowered instead. And then third, there's a neoliberal dependency. Universities have relied increasingly on federal funding, and that has enabled the ideological extortion and has led to anticipatory obedience as well. And what we see overall is that under the frame of anti-wokeness, we see now that anti-gender, anti-race, anti-science, anti-intellectual logics have fused into a very coordinated authoritarian backsliding. And so my first contribution is conceptual, looking at the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-gender mobilizations. These are by no means peripheral cultural wars, as they sometimes called, but they are core mechanisms of de-democratization in higher education. Next slide, please. I turn now to the relationship between these infrastructures and democratic inclusive knowledge production. And in our context article, we argue that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a slogan, but it's an infrastructure. Our empirical case is the National Science Foundation Advanced Program that had for over 24 years funded systematic institutional change projects at more than 200 universities in the United States and built a network of around 1,500 team members and generated over 850 publications just by 2021. In our research, we've shown two key things here that are relevant. Advance has produced interdisciplinary knowledge also about change and about intersectional inequalities in science and organizations. And interdisciplinary work was across psychology, sociology, organizational science, and also the STEM fields. And the second important finding was that COVID-19, when COVID-19 happened, the advanced networks on the campuses acted as crisis infrastructures that were able to give universities real-time data that helped the university's leadership then to protect faculty from emerging intersectional inequalities. But what happened then with the second Trump administration is that already in January 2025, the National Science Foundation quietly archived Advance. Grants were terminated mid-cycle. The funding to the Resource Coordination Network and the Advanced Journal were eliminated. And across the United States, the DEI offices have been renamed, dissolved, or defunded under the threat of losing federal grants. So my second contribution here is empirical. What we see is that infrastructure does not just transport knowledge, but they sustain democratic and inclusive knowledge production. So dismantling them destroys networks, data, and resilience that can take and the rebuilding will take years. Next slide, please. So let me close with the synthesis of the title promises: epistemic warfare, DEI as infrastructure, and the liberal script. What we are seeing here is that an emerging coalition seeks to replace the post-1960s liberal democratic order that was grounded in civil rights, in gender equality, and non-discrimination, and is trying to transform this into a hierarchical, racist, patriarchal order in which misogyny operates as the connective logic. When we look at Project 2025, it's an ideological blueprint that has been very central to it as a struggle over epistemic authority. And this speaks, of course, directly to Europe, because the Project 2025 was also really built on Orban's ideas and his strategies in Hungary. We look at the US assaults on universities, not as physical, not due to physical austerity, but it's really a targeted project of ideological restructuring and replacing scientific authority. I'm from Germany originally, and what we see here is that Germany is also not immune. We see that the right-wing party AfD has been systematically attacking gender studies and has even called for the expulsion of gender professors. And in the name of saving money and anti-bureaucracy, there's a recent report, the Leopoldina report, that downgrades now equality and diversity to societal secondary goals, so to speak, rather than seeing them as an responsibility of the state and of public universities based on a basic law. For research, I want to argue that we need to theorize institutionalization as both a feminist achievement, but also as a site of vulnerability. And it means for the practice, defending DEI infrastructure and its goals means defending academic freedom and democracy itself. Since ironically, in the US, we can see how the DEI infrastructures themselves can be turned around now to protect white cis men. So transnational alliances can become protective infrastructures for endangered scholars, data, and scholarship, but gender equality and diversity must not be treated as voluntary negotiable second goals. Because to protect academic freedom is to protect and defend democracy. And I now hand over back to Daniel so we can hear from the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathrin, for this great presentation. And I don't have much to say. I'll just hand over to the next presentation now by Professor Emanuela Lombardo from Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence. The floor is yours, Emma.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kathrin and Daniel. And hello from Florence to everyone there in the audience. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will address the issue from a more broader perspective within the research that we are conducting, the Horizon Europe Kindle project on feminism and democracy. And the epistemic politics of the anti-gender project is about the idea that, in fact, the anti-gender politics is not just against equality. It is a project that tries to de-democratize society, as Kathrin was arguing before. And so in our research, in particular here on the Spanish case with my colleagues Paloma Caravantes and Silvia Diaz-Fernandez, we find that we need to do a combined analysis of how the anti-gender politics operates in different spheres to understand this autocratization project. So we need to look at institutional civil society and the digital spheres to try to understand this phenomenon. And the fact that it operates through different mechanisms that have to do with knowledge, but also with violence. So in terms of knowledge that concerns us in this roundtable, the anti-gender politics is struggling to get cultural hegemony in order to normalize an exclusionary narrative as if they were commonsensical, and to roll back human rights and present this as if it were democratic restoration. And they do so by using different kind of rhetorical strategies, and one is what Voda calls the victim-perpetrator reversal, that presents marginalized communities like LGBTI, racialized communities, as if they were the perpetrator of some kind of injustice, and majoritize communities as being the victim of this. And they aim at what Elżbieta Gorol-Cutamike-Verlu called this epistemic chaos, whereby we do not understand any longer what is discrimination and what is human rights. So in the case of the Spanish situation that we analyzed with my colleagues, we find that the anti-gender actors use moral panic as a strategy to normalize their exclusionary project. And some of the empirical evidence we have is that there is an anti-feminist moral panic that presents all kind of feminist knowledge as something that is against democracy. So they speak about the most totalitarian movement of the 21st century when they speak about the feminist movement, or when sexual and reproductive rights are defended, they speak of a culture of death, for example, and then the attacks on academic freedom in terms of attacks to gender studies, queer theory, as if it were ideological indoctrination, and ridiculing and really delegitimizing this knowledge. There is also this negationist moral panic by which knowledge and data, official data about the systemic character of gender-based violence is delegitimized as if it were something that it doesn't exist. No, they deny the existence of gender-based violence. They say that they, in this case, is the far-right party Vox in Spain. They say that violence has no gender, and against all the evidence and the data and the knowledge that has been collected that shows the opposite. And then they develop a nativist moral panic, again, against all data and knowledge, by presenting migrant people, especially Muslim people, as the more linked to criminality, to the rise of criminality in Spain, and diffusing slogan that Spanish families are unsafe in their own neighborhood. So if we can move to the next one, thanks. So the result of these politics is to delegitimize, to vilify, to discredit, and in the end, to exclude feminist, anti-racist, LGBTIQ racialized actors and knowledge from the public sphere. So it is a project of de-democratization. It is not just something isolated. Now, what implications for further research and practice in higher education, how to connect it? In terms of research, this really calls for the need for public institutions to fund and for academics, researchers to do research on the anti-gender project and on the feminist institutional and civil society responses to these attacks, which are working to promote the democratization of society in knowledge, but also in many other domains. And in terms of practice, several of these Horizon Europe projects that work on feminism and democracy that the European Commission has funded are developing also best practices that draw on the research conducted throughout the years on how to counter this kind of de-democratization. And so, for example, in the case of the Kindle project, there was the latest short documents that we have produced is about these best practices to counter de-democratization, and this includes recognizing anti-gender politics as a threat to democracy, so explicitly recognizing it as a threat to democracy and not that something that only concerns equality, and countering gendered violence in all its respect, because this is part of achieving a more democratic society, defending democratic knowledge production and epistemic pluralism, which is crucial for democracy, and finally strengthening civil society that is working on equality, on democracy, and on human rights. And this connects me to the last point with higher education, which is the importance that Kathrin was stressing before of safeguarding, supporting, and strengthening equality and democracy infrastructures and actors in higher education. So thank you for your attention. And if you want to know more about the research that we are doing in Kindle, please have a look at our web. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for this presentation. And the next one will be by Dr. Didem Ünal Abadai from the University of Helsinki. The floor is yours, Didem.
Hello, everyone. And thank you, Danielle and Kathrin, for organizing this. And thank you for all the co-panelists. I'm really happy to be part of this roundtable. And I will try to build on what Kathrin and Emanuela have already explained so well, and shifting our focus to the Turkish case and to the question of how authoritarianism reorganizes expertise and truth through gendered epistemic battles. And in looking at the Turkish case, I see authoritarianism as an epistemic project. And in the last decade, there has been a dramatic epistemic crackdown on autonomous universities in Turkey through various modalities, through politicized appointments, dismissal of critical academics, bans on gender equality terminology. And the result is a complete restructuring of knowledge institutions and knowledge regimes. Studying in the politics of knowledge in an authoritarian context is challenging because you might feel tempted to see it as a top-down project, but the complete picture is more complex and nuanced than that. Rather than treating this epistemic crackdown only as a top-down phenomenon, I suggest that we also see it as a form of state-movement epistemic convergence. And by this, I mean the simultaneous operations of state actors and anti-gender actors and their close cooperation in restructuring knowledge institutions and knowledge regimes. And when we look at the Turkish case, we see the state movement epistemic convergence in the close cooperation between Islamist NGOs, state ministries and agencies, and the Directorate of Religious Affairs, and in the way they co-produce family-centered anti-gender knowledge through a hybrid authoritarian epistemic regime. So in that sense, I read this as a co-production of an authoritarian epistemic project. And in restructuring these knowledge institutions, anti-gender mobilizations, which have been recently gaining a lot of traction in the Turkish case, have played a very important role and generated a parallel epistemic field. Through their networks of NGOs, religious foundations, think tanks, and media, where they claim counter-expertise grounded in pseudoscience and moralized claims. So my general question, the general question that I ask in this talk is, how do epistemic struggles serve to institutionalize post-truth epistemologies in authoritarian context? And I would like to emphasize two particular points. As I just said, first of all, I would like to emphasize the simultaneous functioning of top-down and bottom-up processes of illiberal epistemic struggles. So these top-down interventions, state interventions, and crackdown on higher education closely intertwine with bottom-up processes of anti-gender mobilizations and converge through this close cooperation between state actors and movement actors. And we know that anti-gender actors use quite affective discursive styles, and this helps them to generate legitimacy in the public eyes. And they do so through moral panics and conspiracy thinking, which in return lead to the erosion of scientific trust and politicization of expertise. They also use the rhetoric of epistemic victimhood, by saying that, claiming that, quote, our knowledge is silenced by Western gender ideology, unquote. But this affect-driven alternative knowledge claims cannot be just confined to the discursive sphere in the Turkish case. It is this affective discursive style is also increasingly institutionalized and finds its way into state policy. And one important factor in facilitating this is anti-gender actors' direct access to state authorities and their direct access to lobbying mechanisms. And this state movement convergence facilitates the restructuring of knowledge regimes in Turkey. And the second point that I would like to emphasize here is the simultaneous functioning of repressive and proactive modalities of restructuring knowledge regimes. In authoritarian, again, in studying authoritarian context, we might tend to stress the repressive interventions such as policy reversals, but I think it's equally important to take seriously the proactive ways, the ways in which these actors establish new institutions and parallel epistemic infrastructures. And the result of this simultaneous functioning of repressive and proactive modalities is a new politics of truth where epistemic credibility is performed through pseudoscience and affective discursive styles, such as moral panics and moralized claims. And So there are, when I look at the Turkish case, I see multiple factors that facilitates anti-gender actors' performances of epistemic authority. One important factor, as I just said, is the creation of parallel epistemic infrastructures. These are platforms, organizational structures enabling authority. They are established under the name of scientific committees or international conferences and symposia. And the aim is to generate a parallel epistemic ecosystem through entanglements with formal academia. And we might also say that there's a legitimacy spillover from academia to anti-gender mobilizations in that sense. And through these parallel epistemic infrastructures, these actors claim scientific authority. They publish scientific reports, publications mimicking the format of peer-reviewed journals, statistics, literature reviews, and this enables them to make claims to evidence, objectivity, and expertise. And this brings me to my final point. Relying on these parallel epistemic infrastructures and the claims of scientific authority they make in these infrastructures, these actors aim to also claim a normative moral authority, to propose alternative legal, pedagogical, and psychological models, which in return enable them to initiate and institutionalize a new politics of knowledge, shifting the focus from gender studies to family studies. And I stop here just to respect the time limits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didem. So we'll directly head over to the next talk, which will be delivered by Professor Julian Hamann from Humboldt University, Berlin. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be part of this roundtable, and thanks for having me, Daniel and Kathrin. So my contribution is quite modest, I guess, because it sheds light empirically on one very specific aspect of anti-gender ideology at the Democratic University, and I guess I'm interested in exploring and asking what is the Democratic University that is mentioned in the title of this roundtable. And I'm presenting some insights from a paper that I've been writing with Christiane Thompson from Frankfurt University. And our paper is motivated by a transnational discourse on so-called cancel culture on campuses, university campuses. And we had the naive idea to be able to cool down this very emotional, very polarized, very polemic discourse with some empirical insights. And so together with a group of colleagues, we conducted a quantitative survey among academics at German higher education institutions. This survey is representative for this group, and the survey, among other things, includes a couple of vignettes on controversial issues. For example, gender-sensitive language in teaching, but also other issues like military research at German universities or crime rates among immigrants. And our idea was to find out how respondents expect their university to react in these controversial scenarios, how they see the role of their university to negotiate or to handle issues that revolve around controversial questions. Next slide, please. And the methodology for the vignettes was that for each of the controversial issues, we described two contrasting versions of the same issue. So for the vignette on gender-sensitive language, one version of this issue is that a student at the university has received a deduction of points in an exam because he did not use gender-sensitive language in the exam, and He doesn't agree with the deduction of points, lodged a complaint to the university management, and then the question that we asked to our respondents was, what do you want your university to do in this case? And the contrasting version of the same issue was that the students got points deducted because he did use gender-sensitive language in the exam. Again, he doesn't agree with getting points deducted, lodges a complaint, and then the question again is, what do you want your university to do? How do you want your university to handle this issue? And we offered our respondents different responses that have some kind of escalating logic to them. The first response that respondents could choose was that they don't want their university to get involved at all, or I want my university to sort of support the grading of the exam, or I want my university to refer the matter to the responsible university committee that is responsible for exams and grading, or escalating the issue even more, I want my university to request that the instructor revises the grading, and the most authoritative response that respondents could choose was that they want their university to initiate disciplinary proceedings against the teacher. And respondents could choose multiple answers in the survey. Next slide, please. And what we found was that actually very few respondents want the university to take a neutral stance on this and to abstain from the issue altogether. This was response option R1, the darkest blue, so only 2% of respondents want the university to do nothing. And very few respondents want their university to take the most authoritative response, namely initiate disciplinary proceedings against the teacher. That's only 7% and 9% respectively for each of the two contrasting scenarios. And in contrast to that, the vast majority of respondents want the university to hand over the issue to the university committees that are responsible for handling such issues, or they want the university to request that the instructor revises the grading. And what we see here is, and the most remarkable aspect of this finding is that this pattern that you also see from the bar charts, this pattern holds for both of the contrasting scenarios on the issue of gender-sensitive language. So this is not about tolerating gender-sensitive language and being intolerant towards another scenario, or this is not about political ideology or partisanship. This is about respondents expecting their university to handle controversial issues and opening up a discursive space to negotiate controversial issues. So instead of cancel culture, instead of restrictions on academic freedom, we see a democratic campus culture in which universities have the responsibility not to shut down controversial issues, but to create a space in which these issues can be negotiated and perhaps also resolved collectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. And the next presentation is by Marina Tino Pagliarello from LSE and the European University Institute.
Thank you very much, Daniel and Kathrin, for organizing this roundtable, and greetings from Poland at the moment. So I will reconnect a bit to what already Kathrin was mentioning with reference to transnational alliances. What I would like to do today is briefly shift how we think about European university alliances. Also, this presentation is based on a Marie Curie project completed recently, which did a survey to 52 university alliances and 200 universities. And here, rather than seeing simply alliances as instruments of cooperation, I approach them as infrastructures of informal diplomacy. And I will be back to this in a moment. But this is the key point of the presentation, and we also see this with Julian a bit, with academic freedom. Universities do not operate in neutral environments, but they are embedded in national systems, and they are increasingly exposed, as we all see, to geopolitical and ideological pressures. So in this presentation, the question is not whether alliances contribute to cooperation, but under what conditions they can sustain democratic and inclusive forms of knowledge production, as in the spirit of this roundtable. Next, please. Thank you. Okay, it was already there. So, what does it mean to take this perspective seriously? Can we go back? Sorry. Thank you very much. So, first of all, with infrastructures of informal diplomacy, I do not mean something technical or administrative, but I mean a set of institutionalized relationships, practices, and capacities to make international engagement possible, regardless of the political conditions around them. And with informal diplomacy, I intend a form of international engagement that operates outside the formal state-led diplomatic frameworks based on long-term relationships, trust building, and sustained collaboration between universities and individuals. Is not codified, is often less visible than traditional forms of diplomacy, but precisely for these reasons, it plays a crucial role in sustaining a cooperation across fragmented or politically sensitive contexts. So, if we look at alliances as infrastructure of informal diplomacy, what we see is that they enable very concrete forms of cross-border engagement, cooperation, knowledge circulation, mobility of staff, of students, and so on. They also operate across the core university functions, research, teaching, partnership, which means that they are not peripheral initiatives, but they are structures that shape how knowledge is produced and shared across borders. However, and we will see this in a moment, alliances are embedded within national governance systems, and they operate, within increasing geopolitical and ideological pressures. So they are not somehow inherently, democratic infrastructures. This is where precisely the tension emerges, but they are sites, where inclusive and democratic knowledge is negotiated under constraints. Next, please. Thank you. So then, if we then look more at how alliances operate, what emerged very striking from the survey is that there is a strong and persistent role of national governments. For example, across dimensions like organizational autonomy, financial autonomy, academic autonomy, we see that these dimensions remain heavily shaped at the national level. And what does it mean? It means that alliances have limited room not to act independently despite these transnational ambitions. At the same time, they all face structural constraints. First of all, funding was reported as one of the major constraints within which alliances operate. And we know that this is currently even a more important issue, given the future of alliances currently under discussion within the European Commission. And of course, there are also increasing political and ethical pressures that shape what kind of knowledge can circulate. For example, in the survey, academic freedom, threats to academic freedom or cultural or ideological clashes were reported by the majority of respondents as having strong importance in the development of the alliance. So what does this mean? That the effect of all these constraints is not just operational, but these constraints directly affect what knowledge can be produced, shared, and legitimized across borders. And this, in the end, leads to a key outcome. So this uneven capacity across institutions to sustain open and inclusive knowledge production. Next, please. And then if we take these one step further, alliances clearly have important capacities. For example, I examined also this in relation to what alliances did with Ukraine, not only providing emergency aid, but providing scholarship, providing curricula, creating partnerships with Ukrainian institutions, and so on. So what does it mean? That alliances can somehow protect knowledge exchange, even when formal diplomatic channels are limited or disrupted. However, of course, this is just the beginning of this particular angle of alliances. This potential, should not be overstated. Alliances, as we said, do not operate, in neutral spaces, but they are exposed to political pressures, including anti-DEI constraints, dynamics, and they do not automatically, produce democratic or inclusive outcomes. Here, I'm not making, more normative claim, but an empirical one, which is based on 3 elements, which we just saw. So first, the data tell us that alliances, operate under strong national influence. So this already indicates, that they are not neutral spaces. Second, respondents identify funding constraints and ethical, political considerations as key limits to international collaboration. So this tells us that these constraints directly shape what kind of cooperation is possible and what knowledge can circulate. And third, Ukraine, as I was mentioning, I'm happy to say more in the Q&A, illustrates that alliances can also act quickly and effectively, but again, these actions are contingent on political alignment and institutional capacity. So, in sum, what does it mean? That their democratic role is not given, but it is conditional. It depends on the institutional and political environment in which they are embedded. And this, leads to a core question that I would like to leave open for the discussion. So, under which conditions, can these alliances truly function as democratic and inclusive infrastructures? And I shall stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina. Perfect. And then we come to the last presentation, in which I will touch on very many points I think Marina mentioned already, but with a empirically slightly different focus, I would say. This is a project I am conducting together with Kathrin Zippel, which is funded by the Einstein Stiftung, and where we look at the European Universities Initiative and the reconfigurations of diversity and internationalization happening in this university initiative. And we do this with a qualitative design containing discourse analysis of mission statements, expert interviews with diversity practitioners of the alliances, and also ethnographic observation in selected alliances. And the question I want to foreground today is, can the EUI be understood as a form of infrastructure for responding to anti-DEI dynamics in global higher education? Or borrowing from Simon and Garfunkel's song, can they be somehow a bridge over troubled water now that times get rough? And the object of study, I don't say much about it, as Marina already touched upon. The EUI is this EU initiative funding 73 alliances with 650 institutions. And for us, what is interesting is that it's framed as a test bed for the future of European higher education. And it's, we would say, characterized by 4 characteristics that I want to highlight. It's challenge-based and value-driven. It adopts a comprehensive approach, as Marina already suggested, spanning different missions and variety of actors in these alliances. It promotes internationalization primarily within the EU, but to some extent also beyond the EU. And it combines top-down and bottom-up logics, bringing together EU priorities with the autonomy of alliances. So for us, interestingly, it's an interesting field of sociological inquiry of what is happening there, also with regards to DEI. And my understanding of infrastructure would be a Foucauldian one. So I approach the EUI as a dispositive, as an ensemble of discourses, practices, and material arrangements emerging as a response to an urgence, to a crisis of fragmentation and also a crisis of European competitiveness in global higher education. And I understand the alliances as both objects and actors of governing, and that's why they are sociologically so interesting from my perspective. This holds particularly true for DEI in alliances, which we have conceptualized in a forthcoming paper as a transnationally boundary object, translated and negotiated within the alliances according to local institutional conditions. Next slide, please. So, to what extent can the EUI be conceptualized as a bridge over troubled water? A first finding is that in the analysis of mission statements, we find that DEI discourse remains highly salient across the alliances and institutionally meaningful, as DEI is deeply embedded in strategic goals of the alliances. So DEI is mobilized for organizational distinction of the alliances, and this holds true on several levels. On the one hand, I argue that it's a horizontal distinction going on, so DEI serves to claim uniqueness of an alliance, for example. It's a vertical distinction, mobilizing diversity to showcase excellence, innovation, and competitiveness, but it's also a form of global distinction, as the alliances are constructed to promote progressive European values on a global scale, while implicitly positioning the rest of the world as yet to attain them. So taken together, the mobilization of DEI serves to construct a competitive image of Europe vis-à-vis the global higher education field. Secondly, the expert interviews we conducted show that the interaction between local institutional contexts and the EUI's transnational structure can open opportunity spaces for resilience. So being part of an alliance can help universities in DEI adverse contexts to legitimate DEI activities and also diversity research. Examples from our empirical data include, for example, that gender studies departments were strengthened in one partner university of an alliance, for example, or that DEI measures were introduced in another member or university of the alliance that wouldn't have been introduced in that form when the university wouldn't have been part of this alliance and wouldn't have this legitimacy of DEI in the alliance. Another point is that transnational DEI activities of alliances also foster institutional learning and support, both within an alliance but also across alliances, as the For EU for All topical group on diversity and inclusion shows, for example, where concerns about anti-DEI tendencies and strategies for maintaining the visibility of DEI are discussed. And the third point, which connects to Marina's research very much, is that alliances' global reach and the diffusion of European values in partnership with non-European higher education institutions position them as actors of informal diplomacy, potentially advancing DEI as a European value in collaborations also with the Global South. However, we also have to take serious the critique of Florence Stalajan recently, who framed Erasmus Plus and the EHEA as imperial infrastructure that might also apply to European universities initiative. So further research is needed to examine how competing internationalization goals and underlying power structures are enacted and negotiated in partnerships between EUI alliances and universities in the Global South, particularly with regard to DEI initiatives, I think. Next slide, please. Our research also supports another reading of the bridge over troubled water metaphor, and that is that our interviews with diversity practitioners of the alliances show that it's also the EUI itself that need to be understood as troubled water, and the DEI practitioners as actors somehow trying to establish bridges. Like we have quotes like, "There is no space for us, we are at the margins," that show that DEI actors often state they have limited resourcing and constrained institutional mandates for their DEI work. And that's, of course, a very good entry point for anti-DEI movements in the alliances itself. The second thing is that our interviewees often claimed the non-performativity of diversity in the alliances, also with a neoliberal framing of diversity often happening that undermines social justice agendas of DEI work, and resulting ultimately also in conflicts within the alliances, for example, between DEI practitioners of the alliances and alliance coordinators, for example. some short implications for research and practice. So on the one hand, I would suggest that we need to research the relational dynamics of external and internal pressures in EUI alliances, and DEI actors could be seen as mediators navigating these tensions and somehow struggling with these pressures. And on a practical level, I would highly suggest that DEI initiatives need to be structurally funded and better implemented in the governance structures of the European university alliances. And there's also a good window of opportunity now in these times that European universities initiative alliances can become players in safeguarding and promoting critical knowledge production more than they do right now. So thank you for your attention, and I now hand over again to Kathrin.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you to all the other panelists for your inputs and valuable insights. We looked at Spain, Turkey, Germany, the US, and transnational space of the European University Alliance. And what we see is that there is trouble. So I really like that analogy from the music as well. So I want to now, because you've been listening to us, really open the floor for questions and comments first from the audience. And if possible, the panelists, if they can turn on their cameras again. I had to close mine down because the connection was at several times problematic, but I'm hoping that this is going to work now. And now, if you are attending this panel in person in Oxford, please feel free to raise your hand and ask your question directly. So many thanks again to Teja Stangor, who is helping us to make sure that we're not going to miss anyone in the room. And so I would like to give a preference to the people who are in the room. And then if you're joining us online, you can use the chat to submit your questions, and we'll be happy to read them out for you. Thank you.
Okay, we have one question here.
Should I look?
You can look at the camera.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, panel, for your presentations. I'm a postgrad student from IOE UCL, and from all your presentations, like Kathrin mentioned, there is trouble. And in contexts where state and federal funding is actively anti-gender, anti-diverse, what scope do you see for building alternative, maybe community-led networks? And how can, even if it is formally not possible, maybe because of very rigid policies and funding issues, is there a possibility that universities can become spaces where informally a sort of community-led culture is built, maybe in classrooms, through professors? What scope do you see there?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I'm wondering if Emma would be able to give us a thought on that based on the work that you've been doing with Kindle. Or anybody else, of course, who wants to chime in.
Well, I'm not particularly in relation to the Kindle work. Thank you so much for this question. But what I was thinking is that in universities, there's always possibilities to create communities and to open spaces and to create alliances. And what I was thinking is that pre-existing infrastructures for equality, for example, in the Spanish universities, like in the Madrid Complutense University that have been studied, like the Red de Nodos, which is this network of different points that address issues of equality. If these networks can still work in different situations to share the knowledge, to also open a space for creating strategies on how to respond, because I was also very interested in what our Turkish colleague was talking about before, and the fact that this is both top down and bottom up, and so there's room, of course, for creating these networks at an informal level, but then there are the constraints from the top down. So it depends what is the situation at the level of rectorate and the level of politics, the political context.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Julian.
Yeah, maybe I can add on that from a German perspective, and I would very much agree with Emma that there is potential in various networks and grassroots movements. There are a couple of networks in Germany currently forming against, for example, threats from the far right in academia, or against hate speech, online hate speech, and online bullying against academics. But these informal networks are one thing, and they are very important, but they can never replace the resources and the financial aspects that are threatened to be taken away in contexts like the US, for example, as Kathrin has highlighted. So this is I think this is an important part, but it can only ever be one side of the coin.
Yeah, I want to just add one aspect of that. The National Science Foundation in the US is now considering completely closing down the Behavioral and Economic Directorate, which is basically where half of the funding for social science research comes from in the US. So that's a dimension exactly that illustrates what Julian was just saying in terms of the money, the monetary resources. That's really hard to come by. But I also have Daniel and Didem. We can't hear you.
Sorry. No, can you hear me? No. Great. Yeah, I just wanted to add from an EUI perspective to your question that I think informal networks are really important, and I think also student networks are really important in this regard. For example, in Germany, we have a lot of BIPOC students organizing also other student initiatives that are really important, I think, in university spaces. And in terms of EUI, I think what's a window of opportunity is that the European Universities Initiative is promoting this challenge-based approach and is really also promoting partnerships with civil society outside of universities. So this could be a window of opportunity to also strengthen this. I think maybe also Marina wants to add something about that, but I think this is at some level still more rhetorically done than in practice, I would say. But I think there is some possibility. But this, of course, what I want to highlight also what Julian said right now. It's also a matter of financing in the end, or it has some negative side effects if it's just like outsourced to civil society and not and underpaid in the end. So this needs to go in hand with structural measures, I would say.
Great, Didem.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
But now, yeah.
Yes, I appreciate the question. I think it's important to be able to look at a comprehensive picture, no matter how bleak this crackdown might seem. I think there's scope for counter hegemonic struggles to contest this kind of attacks. And we know that the primary target of these attacks is gender studies scholars. And emerging scholarship shows us that gender studies scholars come up with new strategies and maneuvers to navigate this kind of repression. They might participate in transnational networks and also try different strategies such as non-academic writing, blog writing, or close cooperation with activism. And another important sphere that we need to look at here is the feminist and LGBTI advocacy, because these actors also produce counter knowledge to contest anti-gender mobilizations, and their knowledge production is very important for myth busting. So busting the anti-gender myths about gender-sensitive policies such as Istanbul Convention. And I think we really need to take seriously feminist and LGBTI activists' knowledge production, because they really can have important public appeal in awareness, in organizing awareness campaigns and in myth-busting activities. Thank you.
Great. Yes, please.
No, I just wanted to add, actually, Daniel already said a lot about that, but I like, this community-led network kind of concept, which, somehow what in alliances is also taking place with this, community of practices across, different alliances moving on. And I think here the value is really to be able to organize, different from universities, bottom up, connections across institutions rather than imposing, a single sort of model. So for the alliances, can be the creation as it is of spaces like joint classroom, mobility schemes, shared teaching formats, where students and staff can, address all these issues. But I think that this unfortunately works. First of all, funding that, we will never, I think, be tired to repeat that, this is one of the main issues. But also, I think these networks can work only if these interactions are embedded in teaching and are recognized then institutionally. Otherwise, the risk is that, they remain at the level of discourse and then they do not translate into practice. It is true that, as Daniel maybe also will add, that these communities of practices, of alliances, now they have ad hoc working groups that work on these specific DI issues. So things, slowly moving, and there is also a sort of, peer learning mechanism from different, universities learning from all of these. So the problem is, to combine, I suppose, the bottom up with the top down, because, bottom up alone is, I don't think is sufficient enough.
Thank you so much, Marina. Are there any other questions for us from the audience in Oxford?
We have one more question.
Yeah,
Two.
Yeah, it's my turn.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. Michael Hölscher from Speyer University, Germany. Hi, Julian. Yes, I have a question actually for you, and wanted to ask, to what extent do the answers to the two vignettes correlate? So although the shape is the same, it doesn't mean necessarily that the same people have chosen the answers 4 and 5 for both vignettes. So it could be that some people say it is difficult if someone says the he is a problem, and the others, totally other people say it's a problem if there is another pronoun used. So
yeah,
it correlates the two.
Thank you. That's a very good point. So each respondent was actually randomly presented with only one of the two contrasting versions.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So they wouldn't. We tried to prevent respondents, anticipating that we try to provoke them, and we try to prevent them gaming the vignettes. So each respondent was only presented one version of each controversial issue. Yeah.
Sorry, yes.
That's right.
Now you repeat it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience in Oxford?
So we have one more question. Yeah.
Please.
Hi. Yeah. So my name is Tanya Kiner, and I am with University of Alberta in Canada. We have I'm interested in your thoughts on some of the institutional tensions that are playing out, I think related to these kind of the misogyny as a connective logic. So, the circumstance, we have a very decentralized higher education system. Our institutions are governed by provincial authorities, but our federal government plays a role. And one of the things they do is they fund Canada Research Chairs, which are very lucrative and prestigious positions. Institutions that have research chairs are required to have an EDI plan to address inequities, and they are required to hire representatively from 4, historically marginalized groups. And if they don't do that, they don't get their money. So it's pretty, it's one of the few requirements that has some teeth around it. But our provincial authorities in many cases read EDI as anti-democratic. They understand this hiring to be against meritocracy and academic freedom. You can all imagine like the discourse around that. So at the institutional level, when it comes to who is there as faculty in the institution, these tensions play out, and institutions are trying to have EDI plans that don't name EDI. They talk about belonging, and they talk about all these, nice fluffy terms. And you see the tensions amongst faculty as well. So, just on the heels of this, maybe community of practice, and, maybe faculty could make movement. In that situation, we see a lot of divide then that becomes embedded in the institution. So just wondering if you have any thoughts about, how to get out of that tricky corner or ways of unpacking that.
I'm not seeing any volunteers on the panel. I might give it a guess. It's very tricky, of course. I mean, and what you're emphasizing is that it's not just top down, but it's actually now in terms of, when you say top down is actually requirement to have the plans in place. But there's resistance at the local level, at the university level, to actually support these plans or to support even the language around it. So that belonging, or what was that, team science is now the new term for, EDI or DEI, innovation, interventions, etc. And I think that is, there is there's some arguments in German universities that say that there's always been resistance. And the question then is sort of what is new now about this resistance. There's a concern in German universities that the discourses have shifted, and that the formerly resistant people who were silent, who were less loud, are now feeling empowered to speak out against any of these issues. And I think that a lot of those contradictions, or the idea of that excellence is impeded on if we work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are conundrums that have existed from the get-go. So I think from a researcher side, it's really interesting to look at what are those reconfigurations of these seemingly contradictory terms now. What is really different now as opposed to, or as compared to 40 years ago when many of these initiatives started. But the way, I think, to get people on board, that is a huge question, right? How do you move that kind of discursive shift that we are witnessing? And the gender equality officers in German universities and in Austrian universities have been talking to me about, I've been doing workshops with them, and of course happening in the US. And then how do we move that back? That's of course a big challenge for many countries at this point. Emma has her hand up. Please chime in.
Thank you so much for this comment. And I was thinking that so gender equality policies of all kinds have always faced resistances. So this is really something that is not new in this respect. And gender mainstreaming, so in universities and higher education, has always faced resistances. And so then there has been this development of studies on how to counter these resistances. So what are actors doing within higher education institutions to counter these attacks? And so, for example, in the Spanish case, we have done some analysis of what the directors of equality units in all the universities do in order to counter the resistances at an individual level, but also at a collective level. So at an individual level, there is work of sort of strategically framing issues of equality in order to make them more, to implement them, and so that people can also get them, and support them. But there's also more collective strategies, and here we go back to the alliances, and alliances with different actors. So with the students, in particular, this is so important. If we think of all the pro-Palestine protests that the students have developed in defense of academic freedom and in defense of then peace and social justice, then these kind of alliances become very relevant. There's some possibilities to understand what learning from the existing work on counter-resistances to also see how we can face current anti-gender opposition, which is a more active, more explicit, more direct opposition against equality. But on the other hand, I was thinking about the importance of these requirements, also institutional requirements, as it happens, for example, in the European Union, where in order to be able to participate in the Horizon Europe project, now you need to, the different institutions need to have in place a gender action plan. So having also this kind of requirement is really important. Then, of course, it is a matter for the local actors to give meaning to this plan. And so that it doesn't say dead letters, but it's something that is then embraced by the whole university community, so that equality becomes a shared matter and that can be discussed, and you can make a diagnosis of what is the problem of equality and find shared solutions. Thanks.
Well, if I may just add one thing I thought about now is that, many of the DEI measures, you can frame them in universal design. So that's one way of thinking about it, that it's good for everyone to have a mentoring program, for example. And in the US, funnily enough, the mentoring programs that emerged from the civil rights movement, looking at barriers within organizations, they're no longer seen as a DEI measure. So there's some institutionalization of measures that have already happened that show that if you can make a case for everybody benefits from it, then that's much easier to adapt to, where people sort of see, oh yeah, that's just a way of how we change the institution to make it a better place and make it more fair to everyone, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's sort of the kind of language that advocates have been using as well. And on the flip side of all of that, Frank Dobbin's research with Alexandra Kalev and his other collaborators has shown that many of the DEI measures that have worked, it did not work. So that they were several times popular things that were adopted because they were so easy to implement for the universities, but in effect didn't have a positive effect, at best a neutral, but sometimes even negative effects. And it's just interesting, and I think that this is high time for us as researchers also to really, advocate for this knowledge to be actually taken seriously by institutional actors and say, we shouldn't put any efforts in these measures that really haven't worked, but to think about and rethink about how do we change institutions to make them more accessible and to make them more open spaces, to make them more democratic in these ways. And we do know from research what actually works and what doesn't work. And so to look at that and to think about how to get people on board with these kind of arguments of what makes, for example, training is one thing in the industry that has really a huge effect on diversity of the workforce. If you offer training and if you build it into the workplace, and currently with AI, all of those ideas of reskilling, etc., of course, for the university number one as well. How do we use AI? That's on the first level seen as neutral, but it is of course very inclusive if you find a way of really working with AI from a critical perspective and using it in a different way. So I think grabbing new topics is really important as well, and not just to sort of stay in the old language, but to really think about sort of how do you build this kind of universal design, work with that. Julian, you have an idea as well.
Yeah, I had just one more thought on the insights from Canada. Perhaps these institutional tensions and the divide that is embedded into the institution can serve as a reminder that any analytical or political distinction between a reactionary outside and an enlightened progressive university on the inside is really unrealistic, because universities are part of societies as a whole, and if societies as a whole are sort of sliding to the right towards authoritarianism, then so do academics and so do universities. So I think it's important to remind ourselves that the reactionary danger also resides within the universities itself. And these tensions in Canada and elsewhere are probably testament to that.
Thank you. Any other questions from Oxford?
No questions from Florence.
Cool. Good, Daniel, you've been monitoring the chat.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes left. If there's no other question, I would have one for the panel. In the chat, there's no question. If you have a question, please state it now, so we could still ask it to the contributors. In the meanwhile, I would ask a question, already a bit thinking towards the end of this panel, but we want to conclude positively always. We try that at least. So I would like to ask all of you or everyone who wants to respond about solidarity. So which forms of solidarity are needed now? Yeah, what should we do now? Maybe to ask the big and not so easy questions, but yeah, would be looking forward to hear your takes on that.
I can start maybe.
Marina, yes, please.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Julian. I didn't see your hand. Please go. Yeah. Okay. No. Just to say that I like, I've been reflecting on this, solidarity thing, and I think that, especially in this context, it's not so much a value, but it's a practice. So, for example, what alliances in this sense, can do is to translate, solidarity in concrete forms. So, more, ad hoc mobility opportunities, more, joint teaching on specific topics, sustained collaboration, and so on. However, and this a bit, brings back to what I was saying before, solidarity as well, I suppose that is not a neutral word, but also solidarity depends on resources, it depends on political alignment, it depends on institutional capacity. So once again, even solidarity, a concept, so positive, but also so polysemantic, can be uneven across different contexts. So I think once again here the issue is, okay, how it can be organized and sustained in practice, which I think brings back to what we already discussed in terms of practices and funding and resources. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have Julian and Emma afterwards. Or was it? Is your hand back again, Julian?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick thought on solidarity. I think we've talked about networks and initiatives and bottom-up movements and so on. And I wouldn't let the university off the hook too quickly as an organization that has the responsibility to care about its members. And I expect organizations like the university to show solidarity for the researchers if and when they are attacked. So that's the kind of solidarity that I would like to see.
Thank you. Emma, please, and then Didem.
Thank you. I was going to actually say first the same thing, because if we're talking about the democratic university, we need to call our our university and other higher education institution accountable, and they have to protect us and all scholars, and especially the scholars that are attacked because of their the ideas that they are expressing and the education they're doing. So particularly when they research more risky topics of all kind, and gender and sexuality are in this moment. So to actually protect and in concrete ways, and very often we find that they are not prepared. So I think this is something that can be worked in the alliances and within all the specific universities. And then solidarity in terms of developing these scholars at risk initiatives, and supporting and asking for all the different higher education centers to support scholars at risk practices. And I just wanted to, because solidarity is so important, in the Kindle project, two of my colleagues, Marta Ravlusco and Connie Rogeband, are working on the issue of solidarities and alliances. So there has been a recent blog post by Marta Ravlusco, and there will be also a paper on this topic if you want to find out more.
Great, thank you very much. Didem, please.
Hi, I wanted to emphasize two particular points, and the first one is this need to go beyond the binary between academia and activism. We usually think of academia and activism as isolated from each other, but I think at this very political moment, there should be a spillover of knowledge from academia to activism, and also vice versa. And I think this kind of knowledge co-production and solidarity mechanisms would be immensely important. And then the second point that I wanted to emphasize is the affective modes of knowledge production. In the last decade, there has been a growing scholarship on these epistemic struggles, with a particular focus on anti-gender mobilizations, and scholars have done an amazing job in mapping out different aspects of these mobilizations. But scholarship on counter-hegemonic contestations of these movements is lagging behind, and I think there is it's very important to also shift our focus to counter-hegemonic knowledge production, to progressive actors, strategies of countering anti-gender knowledge. So this kind of knowledge production would also change the affective modes of navigating this political moment, because affects are, as we all know, are also very important part of knowledge production, and as a very important part of confronting contemporary challenges to democracy.
Thank you very much. I just would like to add that sometimes I think from my perspective also really small steps are really important. So I think, for example, sharing the Kindle best practices that Emma mentioned with alliances could be also a very helpful spillover to some extent, for example, or integrate activist perspective in teaching, showing to colleagues initiatives about safeguarding scholars that we have on different national levels. So I think that these are all also small but important steps at this point. Emma, please.
Can I just say that there will be on the 29th of April a specific workshop online by the Kindle project on the issue of academic freedom and feminist futures. So I think it is probably advertised on the Kindle web. I hope so. And otherwise, please you ask me and I can send you the information.
Oh, wonderful. This is great to hear. Thank you. Are there any further questions in Oxford or in the digital sphere? I think
no questions that are in.
okay, that's not the case. So then I think we leave it here, and I think the discussion probably and hopefully won't end here, but continues. And I just want to thank you also in the name of Kathrin again to everyone who was contributing to this panel, and also to you in Oxford for your comments and questions and the really interesting discussions. And please reach out if you want to stay in touch about these issues. And yeah, with that. Thank you again to also Mariam and Tejas for supporting us. And yeah, with that, we wrap up the panel. Thank you to all again, and hope to see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.